Many potential home buyers in Toronto can breathe a sigh of relief, at least sort of. The latest data show home sales tumbled in January and prices fell about 4% from last year. The numbers from the Toronto Real Estate Board come as tougher mortgage rules came into play and borrowing costs began to rise. But that didn't stop the city's condo market from rising as supply is limited. Is this the beginning of a more normalized housing market for Toronto? Ben Rabidoux joins us to discuss this. He's the president of North Cove Advisors. So, Ben, is this what a normalized housing market actually looks like?
Well, it's normalized relative to some of the frenetic pace we've seen in the last few years. It's really a story at this point of two very divergent markets, and even actually you could further segment it by geography. So what I mean by that is if you are in the market for a condo and you are looking in the 416, then you'll find that that market is still quite competitive and the prices are still at the highs or perhaps off just a couple percent from the early 2016 or 2017 peaks. Now, if you start moving into the single family segment, you find there that it's a lot less competition, a lot more supply. Prices in the 416 are down between 5 and 10% from peak. But where things start to get really disorderly, if you will, is when you start to move out to the 905 and look in some of the higher priced points. And out there, we find that pricing in many cases is off anywhere from 15 to 30% off the peak for a lot of the single family homes in some of those kind of luxury areas that saw some of the most frothy bidding wars back in 2017. So it really at this point depends on geography and it depends on property price, but it's a very different market than it was a year ago, that's for sure.
And do you have a sense of why? Like, I mean, the mortgage rules have kicked in. We've heard more and more people being forced out. The cost of borrowing is on the rise, and the potential for cost for borrowing is going, you know, we all know that more rate hikes are coming, and therefore the cost is going to rise for anybody who wants to get into the market. Is it just that, or is there a sentiment here that just now isn't the time? If you can avoid making a move, now would be the time to try to avoid it?
Well, there's a lot at play here, and I guess I would take some issue with the statement that we know there's more rate hikes coming. That I think at this point, the market is certainly pricing in more rate hikes. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw maybe one more in between now and mid-year, but I'd be surprised if we saw more than one, to be honest. But really, it's a function of affordability. What we see right now is the segment that is being hit the hardest is the one where we saw a dramatic run-up in prices to the point where really it's not justifiable to see the sort of prices we're seeing on single-family homes given the sort of incomes that we're seeing. And so when you layer on top of that new mortgage regulations that force people to qualify at a much higher qualifying rate, and as you pointed out, a backup in interest rates, we've now seen mortgages that are pushing almost 100 basis points, so 1% higher than they were at their dead lows. And all of that is a real constraint for affordability. So I think that's one thing. But, people have this funny ability to jump into a really hot, frothy market at the worst possible time, right? And we really saw that in the 905, where, bidding wars beget bidding wars, and people want to pile into a market where there's this perception of a lack of supply and strong demand, when in reality, it's this speculative bid that's creating kind of its own artificial demand. And so those areas that saw that strong run-up and a lot of that speculative demand a year ago are the very same areas that are getting hit the hardest. And in a lot of those cases, in those areas, so I'll use just for one example, Markham and Richmond Hill, which a year ago, the talk was of kind of this unending foreign demand and a dramatic run-up in prices. And you fast forward to today, and we see sales down 50% year over year last month. And we see inventory that's up almost 4x, so 4 times what it was a year ago.
Right.
And those are the places where we're really seeing. And those are the areas where, a year ago, if you asked where's the hot markets in Toronto, those were them.
Always great to get your insight, Ben. Thanks for doing this. Ben Rabidoux is the president of North Cove Advisors.